Have you ever seen those magical moments when sunlight pierces through dark clouds? Well, this cloud painting technique is about to blow your mind. So if you're struggling with painting clouds, then let me show you this. It will be a way that you can capture these beautiful light effects in your clouds. And it's so simple that I've been teaching this to my students as well, and they're getting great results. Recently, I've been taking inspiration from historical 19th century painters like Albert Bierstadt and William Trost Richards, who painted these dramatic skies and clouds in their landscape paintings. Following this, I was out in my local area where I often like to go plein air painting, and I saw this beautiful cloudscape with the sun coming through and the light rays across the rolling hills in the distance. And after taking these photos, I thought I've got to paint this. So this is what I'm doing right now. So I'm painting in oils, but you could just as easily paint this in acrylics, and the brand of paint I'm using is Blue Ridge Oils, and if you want to get some, I've put a link in the description box below. Now I've just sketched out the composition using burnt sienna mixed with a little bit of pale drying gel, which is a non-toxic medium that speeds up the drying time. Now the first thing I'll do is I paint the dark values first. If you've watched any of my other videos, you will know that I talk about this pretty much in most of my landscape painting videos. But painting the dark values first allows me to quickly establish the whole tonal range in the painting, and then it makes it much easier to paint the areas in light afterwards and also get the right saturation of the colours. So I think this is just an easier way of doing things. The general rule is we'll find our darkest darks in the foreground as well as our lightest lights, and as landforms recede, the darks aren't as dark and the lights aren't as light. Now I include clouds in my shadows, even though clouds and skies are generally some of the more lighter values in the landscape. But in this case I'm painting darker clouds because I want to communicate the contrast. So this is the painting trick with the clouds that we're going to do here, and it starts off right at the beginning in the blocking in stage. So I'm just getting colour down and using the biggest brushes I can get away with, and this is a number 5 bristle flat brush made by Rosemary & Co. And if you want to get some of them, again, I've put a link in the description box below. I'm painting on a 10-inch by 12-inch linen panel here, and this is made by SourceTech, and again, if you want to get some, there's a link in the description box below. So back to the clouds here, and I've used a mix of ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, some titanium white to make the value lighter, and a little bit of alizarin crimson, and I want to edge the mixture more on the blue side. Now the clouds as we go into the distance are going to be lighter in value, so if you remember, the darks aren't as dark as we go into the distance. So that's really important to make those clouds recede. Now once I'd marked in the cloud shadows, I then immediately went to the highlights in the clouds. Now I'm not going to be using my lightest lights just yet. I'm going to save that until the end. So I want to build up those lighter values as I work through the painting. So I've just used, for the moment, a mix of titanium white with a little bit of burnt sienna, and just marked around the edges of the clouds, which are the cloud highlights, because I want to communicate that bright sun coming through. The other thing I'm doing here straight away is I'm painting in some of the sun rays that are coming through the clouds. Now I'm using titanium white here, which is an opaque oil colour, and I'm not using any semi-transparent white paint at all. So I generally don't do glazes, and most of my oil colours are opaque. So I've got to factor this in when I come to paint those light rays. So I'm starting now in the blocking in stage. Just some subtle hints of those rays coming through. Other than that, for the moment, I'm painting the light around the edges of the clouds. This is where we're going to communicate the bright sunlight, and then just also painting in some of the halftones and blending in some of the colours on the canvas here. So the way to capture this lighting effect in the clouds is to paint some quite dark shadows, but I've got to make sure that they're not too dark, otherwise it's going to look unnatural with the rest of the painting. But they've got to be dark enough, and I keep in mind that clouds and skies are generally the lighter values in the landscape. But it's going to be contrasted against the highlights in the clouds, and that's what's really going to make the impact in this landscape, especially when I paint the spotlighting effects on the fields below. So just to recap, this cloud painting trick, if you'd like to call it that, starts right here in the blocking stage and just getting those values correct. Now next, what I'm doing here is I'm painting the sky, and this is a mix of ultramarine blue with a little bit of cobalt teal, some titanium white, and also a dash of yellow ochre, mainly around where the sunlight is. The blue of the sky isn't completely blue around this area. Now just focusing again on the cloud highlights, I haven't used my lightest lights just yet, so really it's kind of a warm grey, almost an orangey tone. But the reason for this is so that when I apply my lightest values towards the end of the painting, those clouds are really going to pop. So it's all about the contrast. We don't want to use our lightest lights just yet. We want to hold off on them and wait towards the end of the painting. So next, what I'm doing now is I'm painting the landscape below. Now, as I paint the distant landforms, I need to keep in mind that the green wavelengths really don't travel that well over long distances, and the green is going to drop out in terms of saturation, so we need to use really desaturated colour here. I'm using a combination of ultramarine blue with some yellow ochre and just a little bit of cadmium yellow medium, and this is serving as the base of my green, and then I desaturate the colour further and also lighten the value by mixing in some titanium white. I've also mixed in colours such as alizarin crimson or burnt sienna as well to add a red element to the green, because red is opposite to green on the colour wheel, so it just helps to make those greens look a lot more natural and organic. Now here is where my spotlighting effect is going to occur, so I'm using a much lighter green, and I've also increased the saturation of the green as well. So I've used the same colours in this green as I have with the shadows, but I've also added a little bit of cobalt teal, which is adding some emerald tones within the green. Now next here I'm painting the foreground, and I need to keep this darker, so this is going to help with the overall lighting effect. The whole foreground in this painting is in shadow. One of the things I need to keep in mind is grass is one of the more lighter values in the landscape. So I need to keep the value light enough that it stands out against the trees that are in the foreground. The trees are the darkest values in this landscape, but also dark enough to really communicate the cloud shadow that's above. For this, I've used a mix of ultramarine blue with yellow ochre. This is serving as the base of my green, and then a little bit of cadmium yellow medium. I've also used some phthalo green and some cadmium red light as well. So the cadmium red light, again, adding that red element to the green that's just going to help keep it more harmonious and natural looking. And then also some titanium white just to get the value that I want. Now when it comes to painting grass, I'm not keen on trying to paint every single blade of grass. I think it can make your paintings look laboured and overworked. So I just more paint the texture of the grass. So I use loose brushwork here, and then what I'll do is I'll do some horizontal brush marks and then vertical brush marks to communicate the way the grass is growing, so painting the grass in the direction that it's growing in. So it's more the suggestion and the texture of the grass that I think helps to communicate more realistic looking grass. I've also added some shadows in there as well, just to create a bit of interest. Now at this point I'd got my main colours down in the painting, and then I just started to restate some of the dark values and just emphasise some of the main areas in the composition, and it's really just setting a kind of roadmap to work from, so that once this painting's dry I can then start working in some detail. Now if you're struggling with your landscape paintings, or you'd like to learn more, perhaps you're having difficulty creating the paintings that you'd imagined and you're struggling with colour mixing, tonal values and composition, well, let me help you with that. What I've found with my painting is having a system to work towards really improved what I was doing, and actually just skyrocketed my painting techniques. So I'm demonstrating my painting techniques and my process in my free landscape painting blueprint. I show you everything from gathering my photos, the sketching process, and then the actual painting process itself. I give you tips on oil paints to use, mediums, brushes, and also there's a painting demonstration at the end. Now if you'd like to get my free landscape painting blueprint, just click the link below and I'll send it over to you. Enjoy. Now then, back to the painting, and at this point it was completely dry, so I was able to make some tonal readjustments here, and I decided to make the clouds in the upper part of the painting a bit darker because I really want to emphasize the bright sunlight coming through and having that contrast. So this was an easy fix and actually was adding more to the clouds anyway, and I'm using the same colours that I was using in the blocking stage, so a mix of ultramarine blue with burnt sienna, titanium white and alizarin crimson. And I've actually found that these colours are brilliant for clouds in general and also shadows within the landscape. Now one of the things also to consider when you're painting landscapes is the colour harmony, and we can achieve this by using common colours throughout the painting. This is part of the reason that I don't use that many colours. As you can see on my palette I have 9 there. Now colour harmony, this is where the viewer will look at your painting and see it and think, wow, that looks really nice and the colours look nice, and they probably don't even know why it looks so appealing, but it's often due to the colour harmony in the painting. So we want everything working together. Now then, once I'd painted the darker clouds in the scene here, so making that value readjustment, I then decided to paint the highlights in the clouds, and this is where I'm using my lightest lights because I decided to finish the cloud section in this particular session. I spent about 4 painting sessions on this in total, so 2 sessions on the clouds and 2 sessions on the fields and trees below. And as I said, I've used my lightest lights in the clouds here to create the highlights and the bright sun coming through, and for this I was mostly using titanium white with just a little bit of yellow ochre, so the value is much lighter. I also sparingly added the colour here. I painted these light rays coming through using titanium white with a little bit of yellow ochre and some alizarin crimson, just gently brushing over the top. I also keep in mind that the paint is opaque as well, so I didn't want to go too heavy with the paint layers. And then once I'd finished with the sky and clouds, it was back to finishing up the landscape below, so adding some highlights to the spotlighting effect in the fields. This is where the sun's coming through, and again I've used a mix of cadmium yellow medium with ultramarine blue, a little yellow ochre and titanium white, and then also some alizarin crimson and a little cobalt teal. I'm even painting the highlights here on some of the trees to communicate the sun just shining on the tops of the canopies here. So this makes for some great lighting effects. Now as I reflect upon this painting, I just love painting these types of landscape scenes. I just love green, it's one of my favourite colours, and I just love the rich greens that you get in these Northland, New Zealand landscapes here. And as I said, I'm inspired by artists such as Albert Bierstadt and William Tross Richards, the way they painted their sky and clouds, but also I'm inspired by the Australian painter Arthur Streeton, who painted some landscapes with some grand vistas of fields and trees in the distance. So these historical painters really influence my work. There's another thing as well about this particular location that I'm painting, because it's actually only just down the road from where I live, and I often go painting outdoors here, so this landscape really speaks to me. I always feel a real great sense of peace and tranquility whenever I come painting here, and it's often very quiet and you can just hear the sounds of nature. Now I finished up this painting by just adding more to the grass in the foreground, painting things such as the suggestion of flowers and also a few cows that are grazing in the foreground. And with that, the painting was complete. If you'd like to learn more about painting landscapes, then check out this video here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.